so much taxpayer money in this show for this arrogant man, while families go without health care, our neighbors are unhoused, and people are food insecure. That is a moral failing, first and foremost. But when we look at young people and their political engagement, I've heard time and time again that young people just aren't showing up. And here on the sort of Dem side, we're losing young people to apathy and to the Republicans, right? To this MAGA extremist cult that's growing online. But while we see MAGA flourishing in these online spaces, it's flopping on the ground. He is seeing no turnout at his little military birthday party. And we, in real time on social media, get to see shots of empty bleachers and lawns with sparse crowds. And it's a reminder that people's opinions of Donald Trump and his administration are changing in this moment, right? Whether it's because of his military birthday parade or these inhumane ICE raids. A lot of people are upset with this administration. Democrats, Republicans across the aisle are feeling like he's not doing a good job right now.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was unhappy. And I know this is going to shock a lot of people, but I wanted to see hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people there at this military parade. And people say to me all the time, well, why would you say that, right? Because it wasn't just a Donald Trump birthday bash. It was also to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the Army. And so I'm saying to myself, I honor military service. And I believe that some form of recognition for 250 years of being in existence, our Army being in existence, I would have liked to have seen some better response. But I'm always curious as young people, being that I'm more than twice your age, I don't fully get it, right? Yeah. I've spoken to young people, and many of them I find are completely disengaged as it relates to politics. And that saddens me. What further, when you start talking about not honoring, for example, the 250th anniversary, forgetting about the fact that it falls on, coincidentally, Trump's birthday. It just happens to fall out. Forgetting about the fact that they could have done it without Trump being, the birthday boy at this celebration. They could have done that. But it was very poor turnout amongst Gen Z. Why do you think that?
I think this is the trend we see with Donald Trump. And our generation, Gen Z, has had a front row seat to it. That man has been running for president since I was 15 years old. I'm now 25 and running for Congress, right? He has characterized a decade of our political understanding, and he is no policy expert. He has inserted himself time and time again, put his emotions, his ego at the center of his politic. And this is an example of that, right? In a time where we could be celebrating men and women in uniform who make big sacrifices and know what service to this country actually means, Donald Trump once again made this about himself. And that's a major turnoff for young people who have watched this politic play out. I also just kind of want to paint the picture because I recognize that for older generations, many folks think that if we can just wait this administration out, right? If we just give it a few years and let him have his birthday bash and put our heads down, that we'll get through this. And the Republican Party of my parents' generation will resurface. But young people, Gen Z, knows better. We know that if we do not put an end to this kind of authoritarianism show that he is putting on, things could get worse. In fact, over the course of our political understanding, the last decade, that is the arc, right? We think about Obama being elected when I was in third grade, elementary school, right? And then this move towards Trump in 2016, in 2020, a difficult time where so many young people were forced inside during their formative years, like college and high school. And then seeing Trump win again, despite his felony convictions, being found liable of rape, it feels for our generation as though the arc is not bending towards justice, right? And I believe that our generation and young people like me who are now stepping up to lead, right, run for office, run for Congress, have a sense of clarity and urgency that if we don't do something now, things can and will get worse.
I just have to say, though, with over 1,800 No King protests across the country, many of whom were led by young people, how do you see this moment as a generational rebuke of authoritarianism, or at least the commentary of authoritarianism?
What I'm seeing on a generational level is really interesting. I see young people who have only known this particular brand of MAGA extremism, right? Gen Z, coming together with older generations. I'm thinking people who are in their 60s, 70s, 80s, who, in some ways were politicized in a similar direction as Gen Z, watching war that they did not support play out across their screens, on the newspapers, that older generations and younger generations are both clear-eyed about the threat here, right? And I'll even make one more connection. This comes directly off my campaign trail. I have not been a career politician. I've been an activist for the last decade. I've been fighting for reproductive rights, whether that was at a school board level for better sex ed as a teenager, or going toe-to-toe with Republicans here in Arizona when they tried to defund Planned Parenthood centers where I got care, or even being arrested on Capitol Hill after the overturn of Roe versus Wade. And to make that generational connection clear, as I knock doors here for my campaign in Arizona's 7th Congressional District, I'm often met with older women who fought for Roe versus Wade, for the right to abortion in this country, have now watched it overturned, something they never would have expected, right? It was the law of the land, and are unsure if they will be around to see it reinstated. And the connection there is that I am a part of the first generation of women to have less rights than our mothers, but I am not the only generation that has known a time without the constitutional right to abortion. It is the connection between Gen Z and our boomer generations.
Well, I'm not so sure about that, by the way, because you say that you have less rights than your mom. In fact, with all due respect, Deja, you have less rights than my grandmother, who's now deceased for over a decade. All right? My grandmother. And again, I'm more than twice your age. So you haven't really seen, maybe your great grandmother knew maybe the difference. Because remember, Roe was codified 50 years ago. And for 50 years, you've had this ultra right wing interested in overturning that decision. And it took 50 years within which to do it.
Yeah. It's heavy to hold. But it is the connection we have in this intergenerational moment. I was at a No Kings protest as well. Here in Arizona, it's 106 degrees. During the
it's always 106 degrees in Arizona.
It's incredibly hot. The UV index is crazy. And yet thousands of people turned out, lined the streets, and thousands more joined in a motor march to bring traffic to a halt during rush hour here on one of our busiest streets. I was in our with our campaign in our car, signs that said "People Power," "Fight for our future," "Keep ICE out of Arizona," "Fuck fascism." Am I allowed to curse on this podcast?
Yes.
Whatever.
Yes, this is yeah, this is E for
but
explicit.
This is the connection I saw, was that there was a whole lot of young people out there, and there was a whole lot of older folks out there braving the heat, because we both understand this threat. We have lived with less rights, and we know the kind of urgency we need to bring to this fight, the people power, the turnout. And I was proud to be a part of those demonstrations too, hand in hand, sign in sign with other protesters saying that we cannot have kings here in Tucson, Arizona, or across the country.
Yeah, I agree with you. Let me ask you this question, because you've organized at the grassroots level. Tell my audience, as a Gen Zer, what's the difference between protesting for rights and protesting a regime? Because this time, it really does feel like survival, doesn't it?
Yeah, you're asking all the right questions, but I want to share my origin story.
That's why we have over, by the way, and that's why we have over 500 million downloads since we started here.
Yeah, I want to share a little bit about how I got into politics, because the word survival stands out to me here. I was born and raised here in Tucson, where I'm now running for Congress. And I was raised by a single mom. And through no fault of my own, right? But by the luck of where I was born, how and when, right? I relied on Section 8 housing to keep a roof over my head as a child. SNAP benefits or food stamps to put food, dinner on the table, Medicaid so I could just go to the doctors when I needed a physical, to play sports in school, or, when I was sick. I was a free lunch kid in our public schools. That is how I got to know politics, because it was people in DC making decisions about if I would have dinner or housing, right? But by the time I was 15, my single mom really struggled with addiction. And while she navigated rehabilitation, I was alone. I was on my own. I bounced around between friends' houses and eventually came to live with a boyfriend and his family, two incredible Mexican immigrants, by the way. And at the very same time, I was taught a sex education curriculum here in Southern Arizona that was last updated in the 80s, that didn't mention consent, was medically inaccurate, taught by the baseball coach. And for young people like me, living with my boyfriend out of need, no parents at home to fill in the gaps, I was set up for failure because our school board members failed to update this curriculum. And so I started showing up to school board meetings, telling my vulnerable story in front of a room of adults, a story I never should have had to share, and asking my friends if they would come along and do the same. And after 6 months of organizing, right, storytelling, bringing friends along, we were packing the auditorium, and we won a unanimous vote to update the curriculum in Southern Arizona's largest school district. I scaled up my work under the first Trump administration, went toe-to-toe with Republicans like Jeff Flake here in Arizona, who voted to defund Planned Parenthood centers, where I got birth control with no money, no parents, no insurance, birth control that allowed me to take control of my body and my future, be the first in my family to go to college. And all of that was survival for me, right? And so politics for young people like me, working class families like mine, has always been about survival. And it has always been the way that I have been organizing, right? Through this lens of personal implication, that policy for me wasn't a talking point, it was lived. And I think it's why I'm uniquely prepared in this moment to stand up to this administration, because these fights have always been about my ability, not just to, get ahead, but to just get by.
I sympathize. I really do. I sympathize, with it. Certainly it's made you a whole lot stronger, but the part that I'm disappointed, not so much that Donald Trump re-won the election. I did vote Kamala Harris. I wanted to see her win. I didn't think that he was the right person for the job for today. But I will turn around and say what bothers me the most about this administration is not Donald Trump. It's the enablers around him that are feeding him some of the worst advice that this man could possibly be receiving. When we talk about the overturning of Roe, and you were right, stare decisis for five decades, stare decisis, overturned with one simple case, the Dobbs decision. It wasn't because Donald Trump cares about you taking control over your reproductive decision making. He doesn't give a shit. All right? Not one little bit. It's the fact that the Heritage Foundation, this guy Russ Vaught and others, they have a game plan, and he is not the message, he's the messenger. And it's going to take people like you. It's going to take, I guess, people like myself, like Midas Touch Network, in order to start building communities like what we saw with the No Kings protest. It's going to take organizations like that, not to oust him. When people start telling me, oh, impeach Trump, fuck you. Enough with the stupid talk. You're not going to impeach him. It's nearly impossible today, if not virtually impossible, because you need a 2/3 majority from the Senate. That shit is never happening. On top of that, with a House control as well, they'll never, under MAGA Mike Johnson, he will never even put forth articles of impeachment for a vote. So it's just not happening. All right, plain and simple. But I do believe that when Trump saw the No King protest in terms of the size, and I don't know. I've heard anywhere from 7 to 11 million people around the country, more than 1,800 individual protests. He takes notice of that. And maybe, just maybe, it will be the spark that changes the way that he's allowing this administration to be run by people who are wholly incompetent.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think a really powerful example of this is actually around immigration, which has been at the top of the headlines, this week, this month. The district that I'm running to represent, Congressional District 7 here in Arizona, is not just parts of my hometown, Tucson. It's also hundreds of miles of the U.S.-Mexico border. And I was actually down at the border in San Luis earlier this week. Donald Trump is no policy expert. Exactly what you're saying. He doesn't care about abortion policy. He doesn't care about what happens in our clinics, right? He cares about power, control, and perception. And it's similar on immigration. For folks like me who have lived in the borderlands, who call border towns home, people I have sat down with this last week, they tell me stories of living on one side of the border, waiting hours in line. I mean, waking up at 2 or 3 in the morning to get in line at the border, to cross, to go to school, right? To go to work. And they share with us the ways that they cross the border to go to church with family, right? This is the experience of the borderlands that Donald Trump does not want you to see. Instead, he, gets military planes and shackles people for photo ops. When judges say no, he doesn't care. When protesters go in the street and say, you cannot separate me from my family and my neighbors. You cannot send masked ICE agents and unmarked cars into our neighborhoods. When people say no, he says he doesn't care, right? And he sends in the troops to get videos of chaos in our street. He is not governing by safety. He doesn't care about safety. He cares about a good show. This is a man who only cares about spectacle. And it's not the way that public policy should be made. And it is a total lie. It is manufactured, in fact. And I think immigration is one of the best issues we can see that on.
And the funny thing is, immigration has been a problem in this country now for, I don't even know how many decades. I can't even tell, 5, 6 decades. We've had shitty immigration policy. Instead of this performative art that they're trying to do, with these mass deportations, every single undocumented individual is somehow now a criminal. And that's all that's the talking point. It's all about the talking point. All I have to say is I don't care whether that they are a criminal or not. If they crossed into this country illegally, that is a crime. You agree with that? And the answer is yes, it is a crime. But it's a misdemeanor. It's not a federal crime. It's a misdemeanor. My point is, we're at an inflection point right now where those enablers that are around him are giving him some of the most hellacious, the most sinister, the most disgusting of advice, which is round them up, make it brutal, make it so that people self-deport for fear, out of fear, post it everywhere that you can to show that we're in control here, not you. And then what you do is let's cosplay and let somebody like Christine Ohm get dressed up in an ICE outfit, put the hair extensions in, the red lipstick, with her $60,000 solid gold, Rolex Daytona, with an AR-15 in her hand, pointing it, by the way, at the neck of another ICE agent. Not smart move, by the way. And stripping down a bunch of these individuals to show off the tattoos while they're in boxer shorts. I mean, that to me is as good reality TV as you can get.
You're nailing it. That's right. He is a reality TV show host by trade, who is making.
I know that. I was co-president.
You know it.
I was co-president of Trump Productions.
I have a question for you, which is, when we have a reality TV show host in the White House, we need to be fighting back, right? In policy, by electing the right kind of people to office. But part of the campaign that I'm running is to say that we are in a deficit of effective messengers, right? That Donald Trump has changed the media and political landscape, characterized it by chaos. And as it stands, I mean, these politicians think that their press releases are enough. They are failing to communicate in social media, in new media spaces. We are flat-footed come January and still failing to communicate the ways that Democrats are fighting back, if they are at all, and standing up. So I wonder, how do you see this media landscape evolving, changing, and how could it be a way to fight back against this administration?
So it's a great question. It's one that I constantly write about on my Substack as well. The GOP is much better at messaging than the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
In fact, I think the Democrats suck. They suck at it. Why? Well, you want to start talking, policy papers, white papers, and so on. Nobody gives a shit. They don't want to hear the long dissertation. They don't want to see Michael Cohen get up at a podium, or Deja Fox, when you become a member of Congress, getting up there and reading off a policy paper. Simplicity is what sells. And Donald Trump understands television. He understands marketing. And most of all, he understands branding better than any human being ever. And I'm saying this so that Democrats understand. When we had Jamie Harrison, you couldn't reach him, arrogant prick, right? Turning around. And I would have said to him, you're going about the entire scenario wrong. Now we have this guy, Ken Martin. Where the fuck has he been? Literally, he took over in January. All right. In January, he took over about a week after Trump was inaugurated. Where the fuck has he been? Instead, you now have Trump's 3-word slogans. And I talk about it all the time. Here's a few, for example, that Democrats should be talking about. It's simplistic. You could stick it on the front of a trucker hat, on a bumper sticker. How about tariffs are taxes? How about consumers pay tariffs, right? We could talk about save Social Security. Veterans deserve respect, right? Hands off Medicare. America deserves better, and keep hammering the same thing as Trump and his enablers do day in and day out. Build the wall, lock her up, mass deportation now, right? All 3-word slogans. I get it. It's simplistic. It's easy to remember.
It belongs in the comment section.
Exactly. And when people are sitting there at these rallies and Trump brings up build the wall, right? Or, who's going to pay for the wall, right? And everybody shouts at Mexico. They know the answer. They don't feel like they're disenfranchised. They don't feel like they're disengaged. The Democratic Party, it's why they lost Gen Z during the 2024. It's why they lost veterans. It's why they lost Hispanics. It's why they lost a number of the Black community, the brown community, and so on. And this is the exact reason. You can't show up to your community for an election, making all the promises in the world. And as soon as the election is over, you're like, well, where the fuck did they go?
That's right.
Where are they? I'm waiting for some help. I'm waiting for the assistance that you promised.
And this is my frustration too. I share so many of those frustrations, which is that I've heard these stump speeches. I've done the interviews on Capitol Hill with members of Congress during the joint address or the State of the Union when they put up their little paddles. And everyone at home is asking, these cannot be our strongest fighters, right? And at the very same time, I'm struck by the ways that when you put a phone in front of the face of some of these members, they freeze up. They are unable to communicate in the landscape that we are currently in. The digital landscape, 39% of adults under 30 in the US are getting their news on TikTok. And yet, and this is my frustration, we see the Democratic Party with a 27% approval rating, something at like rock bottom. And every time a member of the Democratic establishment or an elected hits their stump speech, and I've watched them all, they say, without fail, we need newer and younger leaders. We need a new generation of leadership. And people applaud. And they love it. And then in action, when newer and younger comes around, sticks my head up to lead with a decade of experience behind me in an open seat primary, a safe blue seat, I have watched as members of this party continue to put their thumb on the scale, right? And lean toward establishment candidates with legacy last names because they are picking predictability over possibility. And they are failing to read the room. They are not reading the comment section. They're not listening to voters. They believe that they know better than our constituents. And it is the way, exactly, these white papers top down versus Republicans who read the comment section, pass it along to content creators, who pass it along to traditional news, who pass it along to the White House, right? They are governing from bottom up, and it's why we continue to lose. And yet when candidates like me come around, amassing millions of views, our first debate clips, this is like unfathomable. In a special election primary buried in the middle of summer in an off year in Arizona, we had a televised debate, first one. We gained over 10 million views on our debate clips on social media. Raised hundreds of thousands of small dollar donors, dollars from small dollar donors. And yet our party is failing to see the solution right in front of them.
Right.
It's incredibly disappointing and does not make me feel.
Well, look what they just did to David Hogg, the same sort
Right.
of thing, right? You know, they thought he was not, I don't know, not what. I don't even know why they had him leave, but you know, I warned him when we were all together at the Substack, gala in DC. I said to him, "Don't turn your back on them, right? You're not part of the establishment, and it's going to be many, many years before you ever become part." But I do want to ask you this because when we were talking about, for example, the distinction between the protest and the parade, the right, the far right especially, Fox News, trying to frame the low turnout as apathy. Could it actually be resistance, a silent boycott against militarized propaganda? Because that's sort of how I see it. I think not the DNC, but the grassroots organization that created this No Kings or this 50-51 did a fantastic job in constantly repeating again and again and again that this military parade was actually a birthday bash.
I think you're right that our best messengers as it stands are not at the DNC. Frankly, they're not even in elected office. They are our movement leaders, our activists. And that's where I've been for the last 10 years, sharpening my skills, right? And we need in this party, if there's going to be a party at all for my generation to inherit, right, Gen Z, we need our strongest messengers to be standing up, running for office, getting into positions of power, and changing politics as usual. Because to your point, it is our activists and our organizers who are listening to people on the ground, building the actions that are actually affecting this administration and their perception. And No King's Day is a great example. But the line between activist and politician elected has blurred, right? I even think about someone like Senator Padilla being handcuffed for asking a question. This moment requires every elected official to exercise the role of activist. And so many of them are just not up to the task.
Well, I'm glad you brought up Alex Padilla because I want to take that to the extreme. Like take the Alex Padilla matter and whack it up with some steroids, right? Because the rhetoric, the violence, the extremism coming out of the GOP, again, I know Trump better than all these folks combined. I sat next to this man, shoulder to shoulder, for a decade and a half during the best of times and the worst of times. When you have somebody like Senator Mike Lee out there pushing certain rhetoric, especially a rhetoric that is crass, it is despicable, poking fun at the assassination of a Democratic state senator. I don't even know where to go from there. It is so un-American. It is so inhuman. I don't know where we go. And I'm curious from a Gen Z perspective. Alex Padilla was bad. Alex Padilla, at least Fox and Friends and Fox News can turn around and say he was being disruptive, right? That nobody knew who
be disruptive to this administration.
Right. Nobody knew who he was during the Kristi Noem presser. That they thought that he was, lunging toward her and so on. Of course, that's a lie. But he was handcuffed. Look, I was handcuffed, shackled many times. All right, it's a terrible feeling. But this one, is worse. This is the assassination of not just the sitting state senator, but her husband, and the same guy went after another family as well. That act left 2 young children orphans. And the best that Senator Lee from Utah could do is to poke fun.
I'm glad you brought up these children, because that's who I have top of mind right now. Is that there's a whole generation of young people watching politics play out. We know that this is not normal, but do they? What message are we sending to kids right now in our country? If you are a parent, you should be watching this and saying, this is unacceptable. How do you tell your kids right from wrong? How do you teach your kids respect when this is the political climate that the person holding the highest office in the land is facilitating, encouraging even? And I think about the long-term implications of this violence on who will run for office, who will hold positions of power. If I can be vulnerable for a moment, running for office is objectively one of the scariest things I've ever done in my life. I got my first death threat when I was 16 years old, standing up for Planned Parenthood. I am less safe today because I've decided to run for office, because there are structural barriers that make you vulnerable, right? Things like having to make your address public, just releasing personal and private information that is enough to keep most young women I know far away from the political process. And I fear that we are going to lose out on an entire generation, particularly of young women leaders, who watch this kind of violence play out and know that it is only amped up when you add in gender-based violence, right? When we add in things like deep fake porn online, or harassing and doxing and stalking that is commonplace and facilitated at scale by our digital platforms, and places like Meta are turning down their content moderation, right? Like, the landscape is pushing people out of participation. And what we are seeing right now is intimidation at scale. And it is incredibly scary in this moment to stick my head up and lead.
Yeah, look, I understand what you're saying. Last week I went during the No Kings protest. I intended to go. I was going to actually meet a couple of reporters over on 42nd Street and 6th Avenue. And after, of course, the shooting that took place in Minnesota, nobody knew whether or not that there were others involved, whether this was a coordinated effort. And so I was contacted by a law enforcement agent who said to me, if you're intending on going, I respectfully request that you don't, because not only does it put you in harm's way, but it puts people who you're standing with or standing by at this protest, because you are high profile and you're recognizable. And if there's going to be somebody that they're going to go after, it's going to be you, which could, of course, injure other people. And so, to my dismay, I adhered to the advice of my wife and my daughter and my son, and I didn't go. But it kind of brings me to this question I wanted to ask you, which you kind of already started discussing. How do you navigate your activism in a political landscape where disagreement is no longer met with words other than words of threat, and now true and real violence? Because, by the way, Deja, I've been doxxed. Yeah. I've been swatted. Yeah. They did it to my parents. They swatted my parents too. This is not a joke anymore.
No, it's not. And the choice to take a stand, to do it vocally, is one that, I reflect on a lot, because that viral video of me, that first one when I was 16, wasn't actually recorded by me. I woke up the next day and millions of people had watched the video, and my life went from private to public overnight. And if I'm being honest, it was smart organizing, it was good digital strategy, but I couldn't have known what I was signing up for as a teenager. I had no concept, and I was just a child, and there was no going back from there. And now at 25, crossing a different threshold of running for office, and you have to self-dox here in Arizona if you're going to run for office, by the way. It's a lot to hold. And some of the first conversations I had to have, some of them were calling and making sure on my financial side that I could even afford to run for office, because it is incredibly difficult to do so by design. But other calls were to my friends and family to make sure they understood what was ahead of us, that there would be no going back. And I think this is interesting about the way that women lead, young women like me, and moms and folks who often are thinking. And I love to hear you say that as you made this decision with your family, because it's not just us making choices about our lives. Every choice you make in the public eye when it comes to politics these days has implications for the people around you, whether it's the people standing around you to protest, your friends, your family. So some of my first calls had to be to my sisters and my mom to make sure that they understood what we were getting into. And what I reflect on is that even though this is scary and it's hard, that I know people are scared right now too. I'm not alone in feeling scared. And I think one of my greatest superpowers in this race has been that I am not pretending that I'm separate from the people I represent, whether in lived experience, right, relying on things like social services, or in emotion. I'm not sitting here telling you I'm going to fix all your problems. I'm telling you I feel the same way. I'm scared, but I'm doing something about it. I'm giving us an opportunity to make.
You're very fortunate. You're fortunate that your family stood behind you and said, yeah, I wanted to legitimately want to run for Congress. I wanted to primary Jerry Nadler for District 12 here in New York City. And I believe it in my heart. I believe it in my gut that because of my name recognition, my profile here in New York, I believe I would have won. And unfortunately, as I said, across the board to a whole bunch of people who wanted to get involved in the campaign, the very first and the most important people that have to get behind me on this is my wife and my kids. And they all emphatically said, abso-fucking-lutely not. Absolutely not. So far, what politics have done to us as a family is we're still trying to recover, right? And so they would not join me on that journey. And without them, I just couldn't do it, and I wouldn't do it. And that sucks because I know that there are issues, especially here in District 12. I don't know why Nadler has to stick his nose in every international or every, federal sort of event. How about worry about the district, right? Because I assure you, I could sit and I could have a conversation with him and say, hey, big man, let me ask you a question. You've got fucking metal sheets on Park Avenue that aren't even properly fastened to the ground. Every time a truck rolls over it in the middle of the night, all you hear is boom, 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 boom. It's a residential area, right? You want to tell me how many phone calls has your office received? Oh, you wouldn't know because there's nobody in your office that answers the fucking phone. I tried myself 24 times. Nobody answers the phone there. You can't reach Nadler as if you're trying to reach the Pope. It's a freaking joke. But I want to ask you, because what do you say to critics who tell young activists like yourself to stay in their lane, as if you can care about reproductive rights or genocide, but you can't care about both?
When I decided to get into this race, this is a Democratic primary, special election here in Southern Arizona, 7th Congressional District, that is open because my member of Congress passed away while in office. He's one of 3 Democrats in the last few months alone to die in the seat and leave vacancies, leave our community without a representative, hundreds of thousands of people, my friends, my neighbors, with no one fighting for them in DC under one of the most cruel and heartless administrations, right? And so that's the situation that brought this election to be. And like I said, I had to ask hard questions. I'm young and working class. Can I afford to be in this race? This is incredibly scary times. The political climate is hot right now. The threat for violence is high. And I recognize that I have a public profile that puts me at risk. Can my friends and family withstand this? But the question I really had to ask was, how would I feel if I sat this out? And I couldn't. I need, at the end of this, and in 20 years, to be able to look my kids in the eyes and say that when everything was on the line, I did everything I could. And that's why I'm in this race, but it's not easy. And I wanted to share some of the barriers, right? I'm running against other Democrats in a safer, bluer seat. It's an open seat with a very tight timeline. July 15th is our election. I'm running against one person who's taking corporate PAC money. And then I'm running against someone else who's the daughter of the former congressman who inherited her dad's email and donor list, right? And so on either side, we kind of have politics as usual. But what has made my run possible, and this is where when people gave me a call at the beginning to say, sit this out, it's not your turn, wait in line. I told them I'm going to do things differently because we have to. These are not normal times, and we need to do things differently, and we have. We have raised hundreds of thousands of dollars. We're competitive with these other two campaigns at scale on social through good storytelling. 99% of our contributors are small dollar donors. Our average contribution is like $27.98. And it's a different way of doing politics. It speaks to who are our elected officials accountable to and what kinds of people get to take up narrative power, political power. We're building the strategies to make it possible for young working class leaders.
So let me ask you that. I'm so glad that you bring up, because it brings me to a question that I was thinking about. What do I ask Deja? Again, who I was so lucky to meet through Jolly Good Ginger and others. By the way, you know what you should do? You should put together a virtual town hall for all the people. Bring me and Jolly on. We'll come raise money for you. I'd love to. If Arizona wasn't so fucking far from New York, I'd hop on a flight, and walk the streets with you. Trust me. Whoever your politicians are that have the name recognition from their parents, I have more. That I can promise you. But you know what? I was impressed when I first met you. You're actually proof that one voice can start a movement. What do you tell young people listening who are scared, who are tired, and who truly believe in their heart of hearts that change is impossible? What do you tell them?
I'm young, 25, but I'm not new to this work. I've been in it for the last decade. And I need young people of all ages really, to know that things are probably going to get worse before they get any better. And that as things get hard, victory is not assured. We can't be sure we're going to win. But we don't get in these fights because we're sure we can win. We get in because we are sure of our values. Because we need at the end of this to say that we were on the right side of history. And what I hope young people know is that there will be days after Donald Trump. And it will be up to us to decide right now in elections like this, the special election primary here in 2025, where we have an opportunity to prove that young disruptors are winners. We have an opportunity to turn the tide. And whether that means you show up to your school board meetings, or you bird dog your senator and get your questions answered, or you run for office, there is a place for you in this work. Each and every one of us needs to do the work that is uniquely ours in this moment, especially if that means just having hard conversations with your friends and family. It's going to take every single one of us. And while things might get harder before they get better, in those hard moments, this is the final thing I'll say. I want you to build a little bit of resilience with me here. The thing that keeps me going when things are hard, when they are harder than they've ever been, is that I know who I fight for. It's easy to say what you fight for: justice, equality, right? These big overarching words, but do you know who you fight for? For me, it's a version of my younger self. That 16-year-old girl who was working at the gas station, who was homeless, right? Who needed a fighter. So I became one. And I'm asking each of you to find that person and hold them close to your heart when things get hard, because things are going to get harder before they get any better.
I get yelled at a lot by this party. I get excluded a lot, like even with the No Kings. What I turn around and I say, it makes no difference whether it's 7 million or 11 million people that showed up in protest. Every one of them voted for Kamala Harris in the first place. You did not bring in new people, which is what I'm hoping that you, as a Gen Z activist, are capable of doing, to put in another tired, old, white, male or old, white, female, who comes from a family name, doesn't do shit for the party. It doesn't do a goddamn thing. The people that voted for Kamala Harris, those are the ones that showed up to the No Kings protest. We need to be able to reach out into the communities. We need to be able to bring back people who feel disenfranchised, who feel left out by the system, who don't feel that there's hope, who are scared, who are tired, who believe that change is impossible. And we need to take them by the hand and tell them together, we can make a difference. We will make a difference. And that doesn't mean attacking Donald Trump. Donald Trump is not the symptom. He's not. He's the messenger of the symptom, but he's not the symptom. The symptom is the parties, that they have left people out so that the GOP, with this ideology of the Heritage Foundation, can come in and steal your vote and allow a messenger who legitimately doesn't care about the rule of law, the Constitution, human rights, or anything like that to take over. But Deja, I got to ask you.
Most importantly, does not care about you. That is a man who only cares about himself.
Amen to that one. Meanwhile, let me just say this, because the hour goes by very quickly. One last question for you.
Okay.
What scares you more? The state of the country or the silence of those who still think none of this affects them? That's a question that's been burning in my gut, and I've been dying to ask a Gen Zer.
I believe it is the state of this country. I think that when we see something like 70% of congressional districts being either red or blue, non-competitive, right? When we see parties, the Democrats included, putting their thumb on the scale in open seat primaries like this, when we see Donald Trump and Republicans throwing the rule of law out the window, right? Disregarding the judiciary, states, and state governments, it doesn't surprise me that people feel like this process is so far away from them, that there's nothing they can do, and that it doesn't impact them. They have been sold that lie because it benefits people like Donald Trump when people sit out. It is not necessarily their goal, let's be clear, in the MAGA movement to bring more people in. Actually, their goal is to get as many people as possible to just sit this out, to believe that their power doesn't matter, doesn't make a difference. And what I want to share from what I've learned in being in this race is that every single day I talk to someone who is brought back into politics or brought into politics, period, because of our race. Whether that is people who message me letting me know that they have never donated to a campaign before, or they don't have money, they're barely making rent, but they cash in their coin jar to donate a little something to this campaign, to contribute, to be a part of this fight. Or the people who come and knock doors with us. I had 2 frat boys from the University of Arizona who found us on TikTok, had never knocked doors for a candidate before, and knocked doors till the sun went down. When I talk to people who say that they have never felt like they had a political home, that they feel like other politicians are just repeating the same talking points, they've never felt seen, they've never heard anyone tell a story like the one we share, that they feel like they have a home in this candidacy, I am reminded that I'm doing the good work and the hard work, not just for this party, but for this democracy, to bring more people in and give them a voice, give them a place to share their stories, because they are being sold a lie by MAGA extremists who would rather them sit out.
You're 100% right. 77 million people sat out. Deja Fox for Congress. There you go. Happy to do it. Like I said, I'll bring a whole crew. Let's do a virtual town hall. Bring everybody on. Deja, thank you for everything. It's such an honor to have met you. And I do truly wish you the absolute best of luck on this. You deserve it.
Thank you. I couldn't appreciate it more. And I hope folks will follow along with us at Deja Fox on socials or dejafox.com, where they can get to know our story, our policies, chip in, volunteer virtually. It's going to take all of us, and it's a sprint to July 15th. Thank you for your thoughtful questions.